Hello and welcome to the second half of this pre-recorded webinar from Auxilio and the Bulk Legal Group. We are looking at HM Land Registry's latest Avoidable Requisitions data release, what it tells us about current post-completion performance, and what practical steps firms can take to reduce repeat errors, save time, money, and improve outcomes. The latest data set covers Q4 2025 and Q1 2026, and is the second data set in the series. Land Registry has reported continued improvements across the sector, including a 7% reduction in avoidable requisition rates. But the purpose of this webinar is not just to look at the headline figure. We want to explore what the data means in practice for busy conveyancing firms, particularly those dealing with high monthly completion volumes. I'm joined today by Roger Holdham from HM Land Registry, Louise Edwards from InfoTrack, Kate Forsdyke from PCS Legal, and Adil Ahmed from Auxilio. We will look at the data, the operational realities behind it, and the practical changes firms can make now. I intend to direct one question to each panelist, but we'll invite comment and discussion from the other panelists as and where necessary. So if we could start with you, please, Louise. How can technology help firms catch avoidable errors earlier without adding unnecessary steps or slowing teams down?
I could probably monologue an answer to this for about a week straight if I can't try and keep it.
We don't have that long, unfortunately.
Kate really touched on this earlier around how important, the whole process is when looking at requisition rates. Like, obviously, there's so much that can come into it when you come to submitting your AP1, but it's really important, I think, that firms are looking at processes and products and suppliers that can link up onboarding and pre-completion into the post-completion process. If you're onboarding your clients and they're telling you that they are going to be buying as joint tenants or tenants in common, you need to find solutions and technology that can really do a lot of that heavy admin lifting for you and make sure that that data then passes into the way in which you generate your transfers and then get them executed and then submit them over to AP1, to Land Registry via the AP1. And there's so much information, obviously, that then when you come to submit your applications, obviously needs to be checked and reviewed. And we work with so many firms who put so much time and effort and energy into reducing their requisition rates and building these checklists, building things for like new users and new starters to understand like what could potentially go wrong. And one of the things that's really like helpful for us from like a business perspective and the transparency that Land Registry have had around like what requisitions are coming through and the volumes like really helps us build these solutions like into a product. So we're able to do obviously all of like the data validation for avoidable requisitions to sort of see how can we call them out to the user and ideally like reduce them, get them to stop and think before they submit them. But it is really important to also look at like this data flow earlier on in the transaction so that the technology is really like helping and supporting the entire team, not just stopping them from submitting and not just causing them more work and more steps and sort of slowing down the process. Like, we want the technology to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting for them so that by the time they come to do post-completion, obviously it should have like flowed nicely through the whole process and your post-completion team can just happily click submit and not have to kind of go trying to like resolve a lot of issues throughout the process. And on top of that, to touch on, spoke obviously a little bit about the lender integration. This is a classic area where we see like the integration that we've built into LMS and like their lender panels. We know that automatically linking your priority searches and AP1s like to the caseworker zone, we know that that's just going to take admin time away from your team members and ultimately reduce risk for your firm. So we want to make sure that, again, firms are sort of enabled and educated around how technology and software suppliers can kind of provide them with the tools that they need to automate this so that we can really take like all the manual intervention work that they've done with their checklist and just scale it up and help support them at like, high or low volumes, depending on whatever they do.
And does that help you, Kate, with this kind of service?
Yeah, definitely. So, again, we're a massive advocate for technology as well, anything to make our lives easier. So, for us, it's massively helpful. If technology can assist the teams in getting it right and before they submit the AP1.
Adele, have you got any comments on what Louise has said so far?
Yeah, I think look, we, as a firm, we're fairly agnostic in terms of the tech, right? Because we work within client systems. So whatever the client's tech stack is, CMS, any submission tools, etc., we'll use those. So we work with a number of them, and so we have this view across products, I guess, as it were. Um, and they're good, and InfoTrack is something we use extensively because our clients use it. But the main thing, and something that Louise mentioned as well, is just having those checks earlier in the process. I mean, the what you don't want is to just rely on the tech as a safety net because it doesn't always work, right? And that's not because of any fault of the tech. It's just because of what you put in. And if what you put in isn't great, then at the end of the day, the tech is not going to be as helpful as it could be if only you had checks early in the process. Um, so I think it's just building that quality, building those processes earlier and almost as Louise mentioned, it's the pre-completion, right? And it's something we do as well. We do a lot of pre-completion work, checking the files, making sure all the documents are there, making sure all the signatures are there, if they're not going back to the fee earners, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of admin. It's not just pushing a button to submit an AP1, like we've discussed in the first part. A lot of the work is beforehand.
So you've just touched on the safety net, and one of my notes here is for Louise. What is the risk of firms treating technology as a final safety net rather than building quality into the processes earlier?
I think you definitely end up, you're putting bandages over major issues and not sort of fixing the problem sort of upfront or like looking at it holistically. We know that there's just an infinite number of things that can like go wrong, with an application. And even if you look at something that sounds quite simple, like names mismatching, like we know the nuances of that can be very different depending on the transaction. Like, there's no typical like bog standard easy like residential conveyancing transaction. It very quickly can become very complicated, and you've just got so many people involved in it that it's very easy to make mistakes if you don't have anything sort of sense checking it throughout the process. And one of the things that we find, because we've been building these like tools and mechanisms into the platform for like close to a decade now, and especially over the last few years where we've been building these like requisition validation rules with the land registry to stop people submitting, or at least call out, if there's likely going to be a requisition come through. There's just so many there's just so much detail that you have to build into, and it's been a fun challenge for us. And we don't want to stop until our clients have like a 0% requisition rate and things, so we do want to keep going at that. And we just understand that you sort of have to constantly be learning and building and reviewing what people are submitting, so that it doesn't matter like the size of the law firm, but we fundamentally understand like what could potentially go wrong in a transaction. And the way you validate, obviously, has a purchaser got a missing middle name, have the seller's details like not match the proprietorship register and things like that. Like there's just so many different names that need matching. We just have to constantly be building like new rules and new validations based on what we learn through the transactions that come through our system. And again, help our firms of any size like submit perfect applications through. Like we want to make sure that we're empowering law firms who, yeah, I think as Adil touched on, like they don't have the size to have like a full dedicated post-completion team. So they might not have the time to kind of stop and like obsessively check over all of these different documents and things like that. And that is where, like AI has really revolutionized what we've been able to build here. And we just want to build things that will really empower people at any size. But again, if you're just focusing on your teams who are submitting the AP1s and not looking at the full process around like actually why are they having these problems in the first place, I don't think as an industry we'll ever like fully solve the problem until we kind of look at it from the very start at onboarding to when that completion of registration comes through, the lenders are all happy and you can completely close the file down there.
Okay, thanks, Louise. This is an interesting question for me, bearing in mind that my conveyancing career was pretty much ended 20 years ago, and I did 30 years up till then. I never had the assistance that you're offering your customers. So for firms with high completion volumes, what kind of reporting or dashboard information is most useful for spotting patterns and improving performance? Like I said, I never had that.
Yeah. When I first started working at InfoTrack, every firm that I'd go out to would have, a whiteboard with like completion dates, requisition dates, and things like that written up there.
I wasn't even that modern.
Chalkboard, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, we just want to make sure that we're kind of like replicating what solution they were trying to sort of build there. And there's a lot of different versions and iterations of reporting that we provide to our clients that's really based on the feedback and the requests that they've asked for us. So fundamentally, like you need to be able to see like requisition rates at a user level, requisition types as well at a user level. You know, you want to see are certain people doing certain things? Is there any connection between that and the services and features that they're using? But then you also need to see your like applications, I think, looking at the risk level as well. And this is where, again, you need to not just link up your AP1s, but your priority searches as well. So if your AP1 is cancelled, but you're still, you know, maintaining priority through a priority search and things like that. These are the things that you need oversight over. You know, if your AP1 is cancelled and you've lost priority, nobody's resubmitted that application, you are at risk for your firm. And obviously that's going to have negative impacts with, you know, lender panels that you're on and things like that. So there's a risk element to it as well. You fundamentally need to be able to see like which applications of yours have requisitions outstanding. You need the tools as well to be able to say, if you're responding to a requisition like document, there might be multiple points in there. You might be answering two of them and there might be one that's still outstanding. So you need to be able to tell the system that you work with that don't, you know, take this off of my to-do list because there's still something that I need to action here. And so I think there's a few different ways to kind of answer like reporting and dashboard information, but fundamentally you need to be able to break everything down across your firm and your team to a user level and see what's happening for your team members. You know, where do you need to support with training? But then also, you know, your responsibility to the firm and to the lenders that you work with, you need to be able to assess all of that information from a risk element to it as well.
How I wish InfoTrack was around when I was practicing. I might have got home earlier and not worked so many weekends. Adele, if we could now turn to you, where can specialist post-completion support or outsourcing help firms reduce repeat requisitions, and what safeguards are needed to maintain control and quality?
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, so I think in terms of specialist support, I guess it's just first identifying why that support is required, right? And that really varies based on the size of the firm. And we touched on this briefly in the first part. I think for smaller firms, you know, the issue is that there isn't someone dedicated doing it. So post-completion can sit between the fee earner, a paralegal, a legal assistant, and so on. And it doesn't get that ring-fenced attention it deserves, and often then falls through the cracks, unfortunately. For larger firms where there might be a post-completion department, the challenge is slightly different. It's, you know, it's dealing with varying levels of volume, consistency and consistency in process. And as Kate, you know, gave a great example earlier, it's those small gaps in process that can become recurring issues very quickly and contribute to that high or rising requisition rate. You know, we often see that large firms don't have a written post-completion playbook, and without that in place, it's really difficult to implement those processes consistently. But for both, I guess, size of firms, large or smaller firms, it can help not because the firm lacks knowledge, but because the process needs dedicated capacity. You know, it needs those repeatable processes, it needs clear quality controls, and it needs reporting. You know, and all of that comes from the people trained up to do that, and also from the tools. You know, Louise just spoke about sort of dashboards and reporting, and those are all immensely helpful. But it all needs to come together in a holistic way. And I think in terms of, I guess, the safeguards for firms, I mean, if a firm is looking at outsourcing post-completion, I think there's some things that are sort of pretty much non-negotiable. I think they need to have clear SLAs in place, contractual, you know, around turnaround times. You need to have an agreed workflow, and that comes back to the playbook. If the firm doesn't have a playbook, you need to work with the outsourcing firm to develop one. You know, there's making sure that you have a named team. You know, you're not getting different people every time. You have a method to do quality control, you know, whether the firm already has a way to do QC to implement that, or to build something, that you have escalation processes, that you've got data security protocols in place, and proper reporting. So there's a lot of things, but I think all of those really need to be ticked if you're going to outsource this sort of work.
Okay, I see you nodding there, Kate. No doubt you agree.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, obviously we don't outsource ours, but it's important, I think, again, that, data and information is provided, if you are outsourcing, is provided back to you as well as, to identify any problems with a particular team or fee earner or whatever. So yeah.
So slightly controversial then. Why don't you outsource?
I think we just naturally grew, and kind of because it used back in the day. I was probably like you, Rob, and I used to have a pile of files that needed registrations on, and then I think it kind of got to the point where you thought, oh, it'd be really helpful if I had somebody just doing post completion stuff. So it kind of stemmed from that, and we naturally grew and had people that just did the post completion work for us, and then that's just grown over the years. So there have been times where we outsourced, maybe when we didn't have enough staff to do it, but I think now we are sort of big enough where we don't require that. And I think for us it is part of our process and procedure, because each of our post completion members just act for like one team, so then we can then identify if there's a problem within the team itself. So I think from our point of view, it's a lot easier for us to monitor it.
I had two people helping me with post-completion work, and I remember how they hated me at times when some of the requisitions came in. So Adele, is this not a perfect opportunity to explain to Kate why she should and others should outsource maybe?
I think
This has fallen into your lap a bit, so
it has, yeah, that's great. No, look, I think one it's not a misconception, I think, but one thing I'd like to clear up, and I get asked a lot, I get asked this a lot, or I have these discussions a lot, is firms saying, oh, we have a post-completion team, we don't need to outsource. And actually, all of our clients have post-completion teams, right? It's not, oh, you have to outsource all of it or you outsource none of it. I think a lot of the firms we work with, they all have their reasonable sized post-completion teams. If you've got a firm that's doing 1,000 completions a month, we might take 500 a month and 500 stays in-house. So I think it's not that either or. You use outsourcing to augment your internal capacity to help you with those volumes, um, and also in some ways to help improve your own processes, because a specialist outsourcing firm, can help improve your internal processes as well. So it's not a either or, I think. And just in terms of, I guess, the why, I mean, a specialist firm, we've got access to data, we use the data, we monitor things, we feed back to our clients, on processes they can improve. Um, there's a constant cycle of training, following best practice, et cetera, et cetera. There are so many reasons. I think it's just that getting over that initial hump of, oh, we don't want to outsource. We just keep everything in house. And I think that is changing. That is changing, because I think firms are recognizing that there's so many challenges in our industry anyway, right? There's um, profit margin pressures, there's recruitment challenges, there's retention challenges, et cetera, et cetera. So having that sort of balanced approach where you keep some of the work, outsource some to a specialist provider, actually you get the best of both worlds.
without wishing to go off on a tangent for too long, you mentioned you don't have to outsource everything. And with the new tax advisor situation and law firms looking at their SDLT requirements, they could partly outsource and partly use an expert. Is that something you're looking at, Kate, very quickly, because we'll get back to the main topic?
Yeah, I mean, we're always looking at things anyway. So as I said, we look at sort of tech and what can make our lives easier and stuff. Because for us, we could have staff that either leave or go off sick or something, and then you've got a big hole there. So it's always something that we would consider. And I think with the new tax thing coming in, which is going to make our lives a lot harder and probably take up a lot more of our time as well.
I always say when I was doing my conveyancing, I had 10 or 12 plates to keep spinning. Nowadays, conveyancers have got 20 or 30 plates to keep spinning, which is the very reason why I think they should look at outsourcing certain aspects of the work they do. obviously post-completion work, but other work as well. Louise, have you got anything to add to this final question, penultimate question rather?
Yeah, no, nothing sort of specific from me. I think again, it's just it's helpful knowing all the different sort of solutions and processes that any firm can sort of take on to really help certain people like double down on fixing this problem for them.
Okay, thank you. So finally, a question to all of you. So be reasonably brief if you can. Not too brief, but reasonably brief. When a firm receives its avoidable requisitions organisation data, what should its first 90 days of action look like? And if I can work it out, we'll go in alphabetical order. So Adil first.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, it's something that, Kate and PCSR are actually probably an example of on this call. I think, you look at your most common avoidable requisition, do a root cause analysis on it. It's not an exercise to assign blame, but really to identify where in the process it actually originates. And once you know the root cause, you can put in controls at the right point, adding something to a checklist or some sort of validation step before moving to submission. And that way you can just knock out a whole category of requisitions as they've already done. And then at the 90-day mark, I guess, measure the impact of the changes. And then, if things are working, work your way down that requisition list.
Okay, and Kate, would you agree with that? Have you got anything to add to that, perhaps?
Yeah, no, definitely. So for us, we'll be looking at how we can make that process even better, because we've already had a reduction, so it'd be nice if we could continue with that. So for us, we'll be looking at the data. I think also what I would like to add, it would be good if we could see the data all the time, because we sort of wait 6 months or 3 months or whatever to actually see it. Whereas I think if we could be monitoring it more regular from our point of view, that would be helpful as well.
Okay, Louise?
I mean, my short answer has to be use InfoTrack, but the slightly longer one would be to break down, as the guys say, like breakdown of the avoidable requisitions, which ones sort of match up with software that can really block them from going through, like the ones which are truly avoidable, sort of inexcusable in some ways, and really start to put that support in for the team so that they can lower those rates.
Okay, and Roger, from HMLR's point of view?
The first 90 days is interesting. I think we all know it's going to be continual improvement as we keep going, and situation of that. I think Kate's right. We're trying to make life easier for everybody. So it's about validation and training. If you can continually look at those two things about how do you validate this data, as Louise said, with the portal, it's going to be when you insert the data. That's when we're going to validate it for you. That's what Land Registry is going to do. But if you can validate it before that process, as Adil says, as you pass things between people, it's all designed to make life easier for everyone in the process. And finally, get the training as much as you can take, as much as we can offer, to ensure that your team understand what are the issues that doing something will have on the process. I think if we can get that cultural change, then I think actually the impact will be so much easier than just focusing on the numbers. I think it's a cultural change supported by the data.
So just very quickly and finally then, if there was one change you would recommend to a firm, what would it be, Adil?
Map the process first.
Sorry?
Map the process.
Map it.
Like if you don't have the process mapped out, how can you improve anything, right? And so many firms, as I've mentioned before, they don't have a process manual, they don't have a playbook. They'll have like a onboarding guide for post-completion, but it's not the same thing as how to do the job. It's how to use the systems, but actually just each step mapping it out. And that's really the starting point. If you do nothing else, map the process.
And do you think everybody understands the phrase mapping and playbook? Because I don't, but I'm ancient.
Fair enough. So by playbook, I mean almost like an operating manual. How do you do post-completion work, right? What steps does it need to go through? What are the checklists? How does it go from, the file being completed, the SDLT being paid, to then handed over to the post-completion department? What checks they need to do in the first instance? What tools are you using for submission? What happens after that? How do you manage requisitions? How do you escalate, at various points, et cetera, all the way to the file being closed? If you don't have a full view of that process, you can't fix things in the middle. So the first step would be to, as I said, map the process.
Okay, Kate, and one thing from you, perhaps?
Yeah, I think it's just introducing your checklist, maybe, because something as simple as that could produce your own requisitions. So yeah, it's just reviewing your processes and procedures. Look at when's the last time have you done it? Because post completion can be neglected sometimes, and then hopefully you might see an improvement.
And Louise, from yourself?
I think the reporting is a really big thing to get right quite quickly. If you don't have that oversight around the teams, volumes, requisition rates, and things like that, any changes that you do make, you won't really know the direct impact of it. So getting that continual reporting set up would be a good thing to do quickly, I'd say.
And Roger, finally, one big final wish from HMLO, perhaps, or suggestion?
Support everything that everyone said. I think the data is there to support those discussions about process. But if I was looking at the data, I'd look at those errors as the place to start, and look at understanding it. So a bit of dashboard, as Louise was saying, a bit of process that Adil was saying. But that's where you're going to see, I think, the biggest changes as quickly as possible. But also just remember about bringing that whole culture with you. We're not sending this data out to make life more difficult. It's there absolutely to support. And the way that Kate's articulated, the data's there to make your life easier, the support's there to make your life easier, and because of that, we all get a better, faster, and the integrity of the register is all there as well. So it's a fantastic opportunity to use it to gain across the spectrum of conveyancing.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Thanks to Monique, who works for Auxilio, for massive amount of behind-the-scenes work she's been doing to set this up. Thank you to everybody who's watched and listened. We'll see you all again soon. Some of you on the 17th of June at the Bold Legal Group Conference. Have a good weekend.